Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first Curious Rebel TV. And I am delighted to be joined for the very first time we're doing this with my co-host, Vardeep Edwards. Before we go into chatting to Vardeep, I thought it'll be useful if I share with you the purpose of Curious Rebel TV and why I'm popping up on your screens right now. I wanted to basically create a LinkedIn newsletter initially. And when I started to look at other LinkedIn newsletters, there's some great ones out there, don't get me wrong. I thought, is this something that the community need? Do you need another newsletter? Is it something that will add value to your life? And when I kind of did the due diligence and the research, I realized it's probably something that I didn't need to contribute to because there's so many great LinkedIn newsletters out there. But instead, why don't we do a TV show and live out my dream of becoming the next Lorraine on Breakfast TV? So this is like interim measure. So I'm practicing. So give me some feedback on whether you think it could work or not. But in all seriousness, today is about evoking curiosity. It's about evoking curiosity in subjects that you may not be comfortable with, or it might be evoking curiosity in something that you want to learn more about, or just learning from different people from different backgrounds doing fantastic things. And on that note, today's topic for the next 20-25 minutes, we are going to be talking about branding and culture. And who else to come along and join me on this topic is the wonderful Vardeep Edwards, who is not only an incredible branding expert, but she's also part of my Comms Rebel Collective, who helps me with all my wonderful branding work, including if you came along to my Inner Rebel conference, it was Vardeep that was responsible for that powerful splash of colour. Welcome, Vardeep. How are you doing today?
Yeah, all right, thank you. Wow, what an intro. I'm very excited to be part of your LinkedIn live TV show. It sounds like a brilliant idea.
Not me dramatising everything, of course, Vardeep, calling it a TV show and acting like I'm like Lorraine and stuff. How about, obviously I know you really well and stuff, and you've done a few bits and pieces for Comms Rebel in the past, but it'll be great if you could share a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and how you got involved in the world of branding.
Yep. So as you said, I run the Branding Fox, and I primarily work with female founders, helping with their branding and design and build strong and effective brands. So I came to branding probably the last sort of 5-6 years, maybe now. My background is in graphic design, but I got to a point where I was designing quite a lot of brand identities and logos in particular for companies and business owners, and especially within a similar type of industry. And I got to a point where I was questioning what's going to make one business different to the next, and how I was going to approach that from a visual identity point of view.
Yeah.
And that kind of questioning and exploration led me down and into the world of branding. And now I've come to realize that this is what every business needs, regardless of its size, in terms of creating a business that they can grow, as well as something that helps to make them stand out and have a bit of a fighting chance in their marketplace.
Amazing. Have you noticed a difference in how people approach branding since the pandemic? Has there been a shift in people wanting to rebrand or even personal brand, which I know is a term that can sometimes put a few people off when we talk about personal branding, but have you noticed any shift in behaviours in that space?
I think definitely since the online media landscape changed. I mean, that has been changing very slowly over the last, sort of 15 years. But personal branding has really taken off. And I think it's becoming more common practice and knowing that this is what people need to do, regardless of whether they're working for somebody or running their own business. To have that personal brand is something that they can lean on in that digital space. And it can really help with their own sort of careers and potentially growing their own businesses as well.
Yeah. And
sorry.
No, go on, carry on. Sorry about that.
No, it's fine, go.
I was just going to say that I've noticed, and I don't know if you have, but there has been a bit of a rise in the last couple of years on entrepreneurships and people starting their own business and consultancies, especially female entrepreneurs. And I think there was I'm just going to check and make sure I don't get it wrong. The HR News report said 86% of female founders are happier since starting their own businesses, with 74% reporting greater flexibility and just under half saying that their work-life balance has improved. I don't think it's a surprise. You know, we're both female founders. We're both you've been in and working for yourself for much longer than I have. And one of the reasons, you know, for me to start my own business as a female founder was mainly because I struggled, to be honest, to progress further than a certain level in organizations. And I was a bit tired of having to keep proving myself in terms of my credibility and the work that I did. And I also knew that I had a greater purpose in terms of the work I could offer other organizations and individuals as well, because as you know, I'm a confidence coach with this. When there'll be some people listening either live or on replay who may be considering working for themselves because change again in the economy, you know, with hybrid working and organizations now asking people to come back into the office more frequently. What advice would you give in terms of branding for those who are branching out on their own? Is there any kind of top tips and techniques you can share with them?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to think about your personal brand, especially for those that are looking to shift from full-time employment into running their own businesses, because having that base and starting to build our audience is going to be really helpful in trying to grow a completely new business cold with no audience or followers whatsoever. And you know, people buy into other people's personal brands. So if you can start building those connections and branching out of where you previously have been sort of networking or marketing, perhaps, you know, suddenly it can open up new doors, have new conversations, and you know, you never quite know who knows someone who knows someone. I think that kind of leads me on to that sort of network side of things as well. I think that's really important when you're working for yourself. And that's an ever evolving exercise. I've been doing this for a long time now, and I kind of dip in and out of different types of networking groups and events, and it's not kind of one of those things that's it, you've done and that's your group that you found. I think people move on, people change, people move jobs, people change businesses, people leave, you know, so it's kind of an ongoing way of trying to make sure you've got a good network to sort of lean on and build relationships with as well when you're working for yourself. I think that's really key. In terms of building your own brand, I think it's really good when you're starting out to go in with just one thing. I think what I often see is some people want to start their own businesses because they've got quite a wide array of skills and lots of experience. They go, I can do this for this person, and I can do that, and I can do this. But the problem is when you're networking and starting out that brand of that business, there's quite a lot of noise, and people won't remember everything. So it's quite a good tip is to just go in and go, this is what I do, and just get known for that initially until you kind of build up.
Yeah. And it takes an element of confidence as well, right? To understand who you want to be and what you want to stand for. I remember when I started Comms Rebel in 2020, I would say I tiptoed into that brand. I was a bit frightened about using the word rebel, and I had feedback from a few individuals about how it can be quite a word that can antagonize others and can cause people to potentially step away from the word rebel because of the negative connotation attached to it. So I remember when I first worked with a branding expert on this, and their advice, you know, that they're a great brand expert, but they did say to potentially mute some of the colors around the brand. Right. So have that splash of purple, but then have like maybe mint green and peach to offset the kind of the boldness of it. And I would say for the first year, it worked quite well. But what I started to get feedback on was when people met me, they said, oh, your website brand and the feel of your brand doesn't really replicate your personality when we speak with you. And it's kind of making it's a bit disconnecting because I try and bring as much energy into the work that I do and try and do it with boldness, but also kindness. You know, that's what I'm all about. And that brand didn't really represent me in that way. And when I reflect back on that time, I realized that I was frightened, and my confidence probably in my own brand wasn't there. And it did take a while for me to kind of establish what it is that I wanted to try and achieve and show the community. And I suppose what you just shared there about trying to understand, you know, what it is that you want to achieve and what it is that you want to look. I mean, that does take time, right, for people to kind of gather their thoughts on what it is that they want to do. And then on that note, when we take it internally and we're talking about in-house branding, I don't know about you, but I work in the world of internal communications. And if I hear, and I think I'm still triggered by when people come over to me and say, we need a logo for that project, or we need a new brand for that project. And the reason it's still triggering is because, and it'll be great to get your point of view on this as a branding expert, but I always was like, you don't need an additional brand to the big brand that we're representing as the organization. You need to align with the look and feel of what we're trying to do. And the pushback was often like, yeah, but we need to stand out and we need to be different and we want people to recognize who we are. And I get that you may have slight shifts in maybe the tone or the color segue or whatever, but do you think there is a way or a place for in an internal brand within a big brand? So would you say that is something that you would recommend to do? Like, yes, it's okay to have logos and new looks for different projects, or would you say actually no, in your experience it's important that you align with the wider brand? Because there's lots of internal comms people and communication professionals who will be probably eager to understand what is the right way to do this, if there is one.
Yeah, I think it's tricky without knowing the individual circumstances. I don't think there's a blanket answer in terms of yes or no. But in terms of branding and that parent brand, so if you're talking about a large organization, they may have lots of sub brands. Take Unilever, for example. Unilever has got lots, it's a house of many. But the way I see Unilever is that's their parent brand, that's their family, and that sits at the top. And their values and what their mission and their purpose is and what they're about internally first, it's what happens in the organizational culture and kind of needs to be fed down. And then I don't know how necessary it is to properly sort of have individual brands internally, but you would have sub brands that is a slightly different set of circumstances, but still sits under the parent brand, because they need to be congruent with each other. Because so there will be some sort of similarities, but perhaps it's for a different outcome, a different audience, it's a different product, it's a different service. But there's probably going to be some sort of crossover in some of that internal branding, which happens inside first and isn't necessarily outward facing, or the sort of the end client or consumer would know about. But in terms of building that brand culture internally, that needs to come from the leadership, because so that needs to be led culturally, sort of internally first, and understood what that brand is about, and that's what then gets communicated externally as well.
Do you have any top questions that a comms professional should ask that individual who's coming to ask for a new brand? Is there any kind of top questions or top tips they can manage that conversation to understand what the need is and if it is something that is required?
So I think it comes back to what you said about being curious. Because rather than, rather going, no, that's not what you need, you kind of hit a bit of a wall. But, it's a case of listening and being curious as to why they need this thing, because it happens with a lot of business owners as well. I get approached and I said they need a logo or they need a new rebrand, but you need to understand, take a few steps back and understand why they're asking for that. It may be that they've subconsciously jumped to that step ahead going, well, that's just what I need, but not, sometimes we need to sort of take them back a few steps and just kind of try and understand why they're asking for that particular outcome and what they want to get from that outcome as well. And it might be that what they're suggesting might not be the best option. It might be, but it's always good to try and have that understanding.
Yeah, those are great tips. Okay, let me just check to make sure that we haven't had any questions through anywhere. I don't think we have at the moment. No. So I am going to ask you some getting to know Vardeep questions, if that's okay. So they're not fast fire ones, so don't worry, you take a bit of time to think about them. But when I worked in house and we did the newsletters and magazines, I always liked our directors to share something a bit personal about themselves, so people got to know them on a personal level. So that's where some of these questions are coming from. So the first question I would love to ask you is that who would be your top 5 dinner party guest or guest at a party? It doesn't have to be dinner because that's a bit, 1999. But who are your top party guests if you were to invite them, and why?
Oh, that's really interesting. That's quite tricky as well. Can they be? Do they need to be alive still?
No, alive, dead, wherever, whoever you want them to be.
I would love to have Anita Roddick. Is that how we say her name, from The Body Shop?
Oh yeah, she was.
I think she would be amazing and really interesting to chat to.
Yeah.
Bit of a
and one of
Sorry.
the first pioneers in terms of female founders, taking the risks that she took in a space where I can imagine it being quite tough at that time to start a brand new, like a new organization, but to the scale that she did, and still live ethically and morally towards what the brand stood for. So yeah, I can totally see that. Love that.
Amazing. Yeah, it's just some amazing work, and quite rebellious, I suppose, for her time as well. Pushing against the status quo. So I think she'd be really interesting and have some really good stories to talk about. I'd really love to have Jay Shetty. He's my new favorite at the moment. I think he's I listen to his the thing on the Calm, Daily J, quite often, and she's always got something interesting
and he's
stories.
Great. Did you go and see his Love Story series?
No, I haven't. No. Did you go and see it?
Yeah, I went to see it. He's great. I mean, I like Jay Shetty, but I wasn't really connected with him as much as I was after seeing him in the show. And you're so right in terms of his mindfulness and how he approaches life. So I can see why Jay would be a great guest for you, definitely.
Yeah. And the other one I'd like to have is Nina Simone. She's one of my favorite singers of all time. I love her. And it would just be like I'd like to meet one of my childhood musician heroes.
Yeah, gosh.
And then there's two others that keep spinning in my mind. I don't know if to be absolutely ideal guests, but like Mary Angelou and Mahatma Gandhi, because Gandhi feels like part of my history and heritage. And it always kind of fascinates me, sort of digging back around to that sort of time. Yeah. And just understanding what generations before me were going through and what that life was like as well.
That is, I mean, what a party that would be. Goodness me. Gosh, I'd be like overwhelmed. I mean, I like the fact that you'd have someone like Gandhi there as well, in terms of not only seeing the great things he did, but there's also some controversy around some of the stuff he did as well, right? So it'll be quite interesting to hear both sides of the story in essence, what I thought. But love those guests, Vardeep, incredible. If you were stranded on a desert island, what is your one and only book, a physical book, no Kindles allowed in this place, and the one luxury item that you'd have with you?
So the one book I would have is The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, I think is how you say his surname.
I heard that one.
And I mean, if we're going for like luxury item, can I say my mobile phone? I don't know.
No.
Just keep in contact. Is that not a luxury?
No, you can't. There's no electricity on this island. You can't charge your phone.
Damn it.
You can't give away your mobile phone. Would you say your mobile phone's a luxury item?
I don't know.
Or do you think it's a necessity? Does it feel like a necessity?
It feels like a luxury if you were stranded somewhere.
Escape, yeah. I don't know if I'd want my mobile phone with me if I was stranded. There's some days I think I just want to be isolated.
Yeah, this is true.
Oh, we've had some comments through. Right, let's see. Before we go back to your Q&A. So Hannah, let me see if we can do this. There we go. Which three people do you think have the strongest personal brands and why? Oh, I like that question.
Oh, that's I'm trying to think. Do you know what? I can't think off the top of my head.
I mean, Jay Shetty's not done a bad job, has he? Let's be honest. Yeah. From monk to, millionaire.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, he's done amazingly. And so there's Oprah Winfrey and Richard Branson, I suppose, as well, are really up there in terms of Richard Branson as well. I think he's got an amazing personal brand, and his values come across quite a lot as well in his content and the way he puts himself out, which is kind of leads into Virgin, but it still can also act sort of a separate entity as well. I think they're the kind of top ones. Oprah's obviously got so much.
Yeah.
She's got,
and again,
amazing.
if we look at inspiring entrepreneurs, and especially Oprah being a Black woman, the fact that she made it work in those times is just incredible. And I say I don't get overwhelmed by celebritism, to be honest. Like, they are who they are, and they're just, you know, everyday people in my view. But there are 3 people I know that I will be stumped for words, and that takes a lot, as you know, Vardeep. And they would be Michelle Obama, Oprah is one of them, and Brené Brown. And if I got those 3 women who I find incredibly inspiring, and all 3 of them have changed my life in some way by hearing and listening to their advice and guidance through their books and podcasts and interviews, I would say their brands for me have been quite powerful, and they practice what they preach. And I think that's the thing about personal brands. You have to practice what you preach. I find it really uncomfortable when I meet somebody online who's like this vibrant soul, who's funny and jokey and does incredible things, and then you meet them in person and they're nothing like their online persona. And it kind of makes you not trust them. Is that common, would you say? Or is that just, you know, I don't know.
I think it's a really important thing to take into account for personal branding and general branding. It needs to match up with how people think about you. Because if anything isn't quite aligned, then it's exactly that. It doesn't create that trust in the end user, and people don't believe you, and don't have that authenticity behind it either. So, it's definitely got to be how you are is how people are going to see you as well. It's got to be a match.
Yeah, and I know some of it will be confidence, right? So you've got a bit of reflective time online to kind of craft your narrative about what you want people to know and hear about you. And it's a little bit different in person, because you've got to be in the moment, right? You've got to be that person in the moment. But I will always say to folks when I work with them on confidence is, it doesn't really matter what other people think about you. You've got to be comfortable in yourself, and you've got to have that solid foundation about, this is who I am, and this is how I live, and this is how I want to be seen, and be okay with that. I know it can take a bit of time, but it's worse, in my opinion, if you pretend to be someone online and you're completely different character when you're met in person. And it's just something to consider in terms of your reputation and credibility when it comes to personal brand, I would say on that. On that topic, Amber has asked, where would you suggest people start with personal branding? Which is a great question.
So I think your key messages are really important here. And kind of just off the back of what you were just saying, Advita, is I think I think you need to build that confidence in who you are as a person and what matters to you. And that comes across in your personal branding. And I would kind of have a little bit of a thing about AI here, because I know it's taking off and it's getting used for content marketing and even some social media content. And I'm not saying don't use it. It has a place and its purpose. But what it has the potential of doing is losing people's voices and opinions. And like you're saying, it doesn't matter if people agree with you or not, or think you're right or not. I think it's really important to have a stand, have a voice and an opinion, and have something that matters to you. And that's going to come across it in your personal brand. And that is part of your messaging that you want to get out there as well.
Yeah, I agree. And then, you know, to your point on AI, I love the fact that we're moving into this AI space, and I'm embracing the technology that's coming, because I think it can enhance our role as professionals, regardless of what role you play, especially in communications. But there is a way to use it in the right way. And I've noticed over the recent times where people are almost replicating the exact same content. And you can tell when it's been generated by AI, because there's certain ways that AI responds. I mean, the word fostering is used more than it should be on that. And that's a giveaway. That's a giveaway for me. I like, just remove the word fostering and then, you know, play around with it, and don't be lazy with how you're sharing content. But I think it can definitely help to give you clues and ideas on how you may want to, you know, even if you're naming a business, for example, or what you want to call a blog, that kind of stuff, I think is really helpful for generating ideas. So yeah, I agree. I think AI has its place, but don't use it to tell you who you should be. The only person is yourself and your community who can do that. When I started with my Comms Rebel brand, I actually had a coaching session with somebody who I was initially, and I don't know if I shared this story wide, but I was actually going to call myself Advita Communications. And I got absolutely I wanted the ground to open up and swallow me up when I told this coach, who was a CEO of quite a big brand, and I was lucky to get this a couple of hours with her. And I said, she goes, what's the name of your new business going to be? And I said, oh, Advita Communications. And she's like, why? I'm like, that's my name. And she went, it doesn't tell me anything about yourself.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't represent who you are. I know it's your name, but it needs to have meaning behind it. And I was like, oh my goodness, like, fine. Like, and she really asked me some challenging questions, like, who is it that I want to be? What is it that I want to represent? What are the things that stand out, you know, about me? And I said, you know, I feel like I was like quite meek. Oh, I think I could be a bit of a rebel. I mean, it's ironic, really, how I said it to her. And she's like, well, why don't you kind of incorporate that in your name, like Comms Rebel? And I was like, oh my God. And that was Sarah, her name was Sarah. And she's like, changed it. So that's where I came back in and I changed I already incorporated my company and called it Advita Communications. But I changed it to Comms Rebel, and that's how the story started, really. So it's those little conversations that you have with people that can help. So Keith's question says, what's your top tip? So he says he always felt brand start and end with what colleagues say about a business and when they're not at work. But what's your top tip for connecting the C-suite to the front line so the boardroom brand aspiration and staff brand reality match?
Oh, interesting.
Wow. That's a big question.
That is a big question. I'm not sure I can answer it quite so succinctly at this moment in time. But I think it comes back to it's the internal brand and how the C-suite communicate that to the rest of the company and staff and making sure that it is understood and carried out. So if you're talking about the values and what's important to that particular organization, the way they work, or if it's their mission or their vision that they're carrying out, everybody in that organization needs to be living those values, need to understand why that mission and that vision is important. So then how they C-suite and the leadership carry that out is up to them, you know, whether that's through staff meetings or company away days, or, you know, instilling it in with posters, or, you know, whatever it is in terms of activating those values and those internal brand concepts that are key and being made sure they're understood and communicated. And, you know, and in terms of being communicated, what that means then for the internal staff outwardly facing as well, you know, how does that play up? So I suppose it's for the C-suite and the leadership team to be really clear on what that means and how to put plans in place to make sure that it is carried out and communicated internally and externally.
Yeah, and being intentional with it, right? So I think there's always a gap in my experience sometimes with what they want the brand to be and what the brand actually is. And the reason there is that gap is because they can't articulate what it is that they stand for and what the purpose is. And a lot of colleagues, especially on the front line, are so removed from what's going on in HQ or the C-suite, that eventually, if they don't get that clear narrative coming, and this is where communication professionals help, obviously, they start making their own stories up, as you would, and your own narratives, and you have microcultures in different places and silo working, and people have their own kind of way of doing things. And that's how that's how it's all like started in organizations, right? Those microcultures where people, because they don't have that clarity, they don't have that narrative, they don't really understand their purpose or why they're there. So even though externally the brand looks quite super powerful, when you go internally, it's a little bit broken. And it is because they haven't been intentional with what they want their colleagues to represent when they're facing into consumers and clients. So great question, Keith, but we'll definitely ponder on that one a bit more, because I think it's an important one to really think about, and it's something that as communication professionals we need to get a handle on to an extent. Well, we had a flurry of questions there, Vardeep. Well done in answering them after we just talked about Desert Island. And thank you so much for your contribution. Honestly, it's been an incredible, and that half an hour has flown.
It has flown by. It's gone very quick.
Flown by. But I'm going to be back every Friday with a different co-host, talking about topics of interest and just general things that contribute to workplace culture, but also on our personal level as well. If you've got any ideas for guests that I should bring on board, or co-hosts that I should have, any topics you want us to dig a bit deeper in as well, then please DM me on LinkedIn and we'll make sure that's covered off. And if you want to volunteer to be a co-host for a future show, then let me know as well, because I want to try and bring some different people onto the show as well. Leave me feedback. We will get better every week, I hope. But thank you so much for those of you who have joined us today. It's been a great 30 minutes, and I will see you next week. Thanks again, Vardeep.
No worries. Thank you for having me.